Turn It On, the Level 42 fan podcast, is in no way affiliated with the band. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are solely the speaker's own.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's time to turn it on whenever you can. Turn it on, you know that you can. We got Windman with many faces and many names. We've got Mikey with his good graces and his love games. We got Bob C with his bases, though his jokes are lame. But it's time to turn it on whenever you can. Turn it on, you know that you, but it's time to.
Welcome to Turn It On, the Level 42 fan podcast. We are here with our typical trio from here in the U.S., here to talk the time away with all things Level 42. I'm Bob Considine, here with the convivial Mr. Mikey Payne. Hello, Mikey.
Hello, Bob.
And Mr. Winston M. Walker, Windman with many faces and many names. Hello, Win.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
All right, so guys, no appetizer topics today because we are blessed to have a Level 42 OG or Mount Rushmore member, whatever you want to call him. More than just being the drummer and lyricist for the band, many of Level 42's most devout fans saw this man as the band's visionary from the start. He was a guy who obviously brought the visceral to the groove, but also the cerebral with his words, and he continued with those attributes even well after leaving Level 42 in his solo career, which is really great. We're going to cover as much as we can today, and hopefully he doesn't mind us geeking out for an hour or so. Phil Gould, thank you so much for joining us on Turn It On. And I'm sure when you wrote the lyrics for Turn It On, you hoped one day it would be called, that would be the name of a podcast.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Does such a thing exist? Hi, guys. Anyway, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I don't know. No, we were. Well, I think when we were writing anything, we were just trying to figure out how to write songs and didn't have a view of what it meant. Even, you know, I mean, I think we were just trying to find meaning in a way that would get past the record company censors. You know, like
Yeah,
it was really strange because we were doing something. I just posted a clip on Instagram, which I found a cassette from a gig in 1981. In July 1981, it was in Yeovil in Somerset, which is the West Country in England. And I was going, wow, the energy of that, like it was something. And I did. The penny sort of dropped. Yeah, we were two bands because that's what we were doing when we were rehearsing at at Mike's college before we got signed. We were just jamming and doing instrumentals and stuff, and then we got signed on the back of one song, which was really just a groove. And they said, put a top line on that, and we'll do it. And then all of a sudden we did that, and we get signed to Polydor. And then we had to figure out how to write songs, you know. So it was an accidental band, but really two bands, because there was one band that was like, if you listen to this clip, it's like we are really going for it. Like, I'm 22, 21. We're all really young. We're like terrified being on stage. So everything's really double the tempo as it should be. But we're not like the Brit funk bands around us in the scene because they all wanted to sound like American bands. We're trying to be like American musicians, you know. We grew up on American music, so we were terrified, but we were loud and really heavy on stage. Nothing like the thing. So it was two bands. It's very fascinating. I can see it now as why we had a certain appeal, because it wasn't like what was going on around us, you know. Right. But also we were still in that moment when we did the album, we had to figure out how to write songs. We were trying to do that. I remember Mark coming up with the riff to Turn It On with Wally. You know, Wally was playing that keyboard, bam, 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 you know, and we were just, now top line, who's going to do the top line? I had that B section, you know, the second bit, you know, turn it up, that was my chords, you know, so I've got a bit, that might fit, you know, it was like bit, we were a band of bits at that point. And looking back, it was a wing and a prayer, you know, we got through it and we managed to, we sold silver in England on the first record, so we paid the bills, we paid the record. And they said, all right, do it again. Off you go, That was amazing. We got away with it. We got in there. And once we got in there and built this fan base, then they couldn't get rid of us. Even though we had, first album, then the second album went Syndrome, a little bit weird. Third album was big noise. Fourth album was pretty dark. And the fifth album, but once we were in and we were not in the red, we were paying the record company bills. There was sort of interference a little bit from the record company. They were putting a lot of pressure on me, particularly because of my political lyrics. But we got away with it and we got on with it. And we essentially could do within a certain context what we wanted, which is really incredible. But even though, we would do love games, we would have a song like Love Games, which is not rocket science. It's not Peter Gabriel, is it? So we would do enough to please them. And that was in our blood anyway, because we loved Stevie Wonder and we loved all these songwriters. So we were happy it was coming from us, But we it was skin in a ring and a prayer time, really, the first two records. And what happened on things like Pursuit of Accidents and things like Hot Water and The Chinese Way, Hot Water, The Sun Goes Down, and that for the albums 2 to 4, the last minute edition ended up being the single, which saved our bacon.
Right.
We called it the Bacon Savers. We like the Chinese Way was the last day of the recording. And I wrote those lyrics in 2 hours. That's my excuse. It was terrible. But it was amazing. We just got away with it. But I look back now that all the nonsense is kind of over with all the enmity that existed after the breakup of leaving and stuff. I look back, I was just a big smile on my face because we got away with it, And we were sleeping on floors in South London in my brother's apartment, and then we got a 5-album record to him. How the hell does that happen? Certainly would.
There's no handbook for any of this stuff either. You just go along with your instinct and you just hope it all works out for the best. And you got 4 or 5 personalities too. And it's like, oof, how do you do it?
Well, we were very lucky to have the 5th personality for Wally because we managed to put together things that sounded, I wouldn't be jumping the gun to sound like more world-class than maybe the South London scene. We had a world-class keyboard player who was like doing Grace Jones and Talking Heads and all these things. And Wally was a star at that time, in the early 80s. He was, a part of us, and he contributed writing to the projects and the albums, and he was such a great friend to us, And we forged that relationship before, a couple of years before with the M project with pop music. Yeah. But Wally was the key to our success, really, because he took us out of being a group with Mike was a great piano player and probably could do great things on the Prophet on the keyboard, but Wally put it into another place, with his synthesizer work, So yeah. We're very grateful, very lucky to have him,
Yeah, totally. Phil, we're probably going to go not chronologically today, but I did want to kind of start here today just because it is the 40th anniversary of the World Machine album. And it's a big deal for the fans. Obviously, the band is touring behind it, but and I don't get the sense that you're a nostalgic type of guy so much. But when you think of World Machine 40 years ago to now, has your thought of it had a journey? Did you like it at that point, or you love it more now, or vice versa? What's your thoughts on that album?
Well, there's two phases to that project. One was the writing phase in the early part of the year up till maybe April. And the second was the recording phase. And there were 2 entirely different things. Like, as we went to the studio, the things happened that meant that it was become a very difficult situation for me. Like, trust was gone, But I went around everybody's house at the end of 1984 and I said, we can produce ourselves. We've just got to trust each other, And then all of a sudden, as we're about to go into the recording, there was a conversation. Because the band was a democracy. There's 5 of us with Wally. So there was a vote, and whatever the vote was, you stood by that. So I got outvoted because I'd been involved in mixing and all the projects. I even stayed behind in LA when we did the album there. When Wally went home, I was involved in mixing. But it was decided that only Mark and Wally were going to mix, with the engineer, and Mark and Boon and Mike and myself were not to be involved in that. And it was really difficult for me because I co-wrote. I co-wrote 8 out of the 9 songs ended up on the album, but I co-wrote more than that because stuff didn't end up on the album. So it was just an unnecessary little, control freakery thing.
Right.
And it caused a lot of bad blood with me. So the recording was very, very, because we'd done the work and the atmosphere of the writing was very positive. It was really, and so I did some of the best things I ever did with Mark. We co-wrote 3 things together, and my favorite track after maybe the track "I Want Eyes" is my favorite song on Understanding the Light that me and Mark did. But like "Good Man in the Storm" is like just a great moment for us as a writing pair, and that was done in the best spirit you can imagine. We're just together. I got a keyboard, he's got the bass, and he's got these top lines, he's got lyrics, and I do this. It was just brilliant, but it's so unnecessary for what happened later. And then I was supposed to leave at the end of the year because of all that,
Right.
And then I stayed, probably overstayed my welcome, really. But it was an amazing experience to hit those spots in the studio, because we were 5 years in. I turn up with my drums to Juliet, and there's no problem. I've got the drums tuned in a great way that works with the room. I know what I'm doing. Mark knows what he's doing. Boon's got this amazing sound. We all know what we're about by then, after 5 years of this mayhem, touring every year and an album every year. And it should have been a much better experience. But, you hear about this all the time. Look at I'm not going to compare ourselves to Fleetwood Mac, but, the turmoil they went through with Rumours,
Right.
people splitting up and then people having affairs,
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're in the middle of all that, actually it lends itself to be, it's painful to be involved, but it was actually, I don't know, maybe it was part of the reason why it was so successful, because what was in those lyrics and what was in the music was actually something, there's a lot of pain,
Yeah.
because it was friendships dying on the spot. I mean, when you listen to the lyrics, like Physical Presence, I'm not talking about a relationship with a woman. I'm talking about my relationship with my best friend, Mark.
Yeah.
I leave as I enter, another boy. And that's what I'm writing about, and I'm hiding it. And Mark was a very good singer, but all he would do is he put the lyrics in front of him, and he would do 3 or 4 takes, and then you comp. He wasn't really analysing.
Right.
So what I was writing was like "Good Man in the Storm" was really about that situation I found myself in. So I managed to slip it in there. But what was happening in the band led into the music. I think that gives it a bit more depth of layers, rather than just being writing about something that I think, people. I'm trying to write something to fulfill a contract with a record. No, it was real feelings we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, can I just? I have to ask this because you're here, Phil, and "Good Man in the Storm" for me, and I think even for Mikey too, is as a song the pinnacle, right? And since you're here, and you just brought it up, we always thought there was at least I've always heard that "Good Man in the Storm" was kind of a Boon type song. So you're telling us something different. It was a Mark type song lyrically?
Me and Mark wrote that song together. So
Okay.
yeah, us.
Okay.
And the idea of I was 28 at the time when we made that record, and I think as you get towards the end of your 20s, a lot of things change anyway. You start to it's called some Saturn rises in astrology. So something happens when I think Bruce Springsteen talked about that. Everything's going on fire, and all of a sudden you realise there are changes to be made, and it's difficult, and not, even in yourself, let alone with your people you're around, because you might be, I was playing my brother's band from the age of 15. I started playing drums. He already had a band, so I joined his band and got a kit, And I met Mark when I was 18. He was 17. But we were playing together all the time. So by the time I was 30, obviously I've been playing with my brother for half my life. I've been playing for Mark nearly half my life. And once I met Mark when I was 18, we were thick as thieves, and we were always playing together or jamming. We did stuff on the other way. So that's a long time to be with people, and then you're from 22 to 30, we were in this band,
Yeah.
So it's a very, and like John Lennon said about, being in the Beatles, said like you get to a point where, your life's a misery because Ringo got the tambourine part wrong,
What?
And it's like that because if somebody's picking their nose on the bus off, like you get into a row, I don't know, it's ridiculous, but you definitely cannot see the wood for the trees. You're in a bubble.
Yeah.
And and it becomes very political. It takes a lot of time to appreciate the fact that you even could go through something like that, let alone have the opportunity to write things that you really feel and really mean and really care about.
Yeah.
And I think I don't see Mark now. We don't really talk, but like I'm sure that he's looking back on it and feeling that way that I do. Like he must be incredibly proud as I am about. We actually made it. We got through. When we arrived in LA in '83 with the fantastic Earth, Wind and Fire guys, Larry and Verdine, there were a team of songwriters there ready to go. We were going to do the LA thing, and you can see on Micro Kid and Dance on Heavy Weather, there's 5 writers.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe 6 writers on Micro Kid. It's the LA thing,
Yeah.
And after we tried it a couple of times, we said to Larry and Verdine, "Look, man, we can't do this. We've got to do our own thing." And their brief was to give us the big hit record, and they said, and they backed us, and luckily we came up with The Sun Goes Down, so we actually got a gold record out of that experience. But we were in a situation where we had to fight for the record company not to do to us what they were doing to so many bands. But no, they're going to, like Earth, Wind and Fire would do. They would go to New York and find out what's happening in the clubs, and then they go back to LA and record Boogie Wonderland. They were doing it in a very methodical way. That's what that was almost happening to us. But we didn't. We fought that, and then we had success on our own terms with World Machine. So it's like an amazing thing to have got to that place, having fought those battles and not being subsumed by the industry. To yes, we'll do what you want. We just want a swimming pool, And we had a bit more character than that. We had a bit more balls, So
Yeah.
we fought back, and we ended up being able to do it. And World Machine. I think World Machine went double platinum in the UK as did Running the Family, and that's quite a lot. And not even Who's Next by The Who went double platinum, So we got to a place on our own terms, and I think World Machine is the best thing we ever did, really, collectively. It's beautiful. We did a sorry to go on, but we did a little chat about it at a place called Kef Audio in London, where they have all this high-end audio. It's an amazing place, massive, on Great Bond Street in central London. There's this huge sort of also sort of mini warehouse full of all this amazing, like £5,000 speakers and £10,000 turntables. And they do a thing where they do a Q&A on an album. They play the album, and there were 60 people there listening to the Q&A. And I hadn't heard World Machine for a long time in its entirety. I do play things like Physical Presence from time to time because I like the sound of that, the way we played that. But
Yeah, especially the drums and that
it's
song.
always like The Good Man in the Storm. The whole room applauded after that. There's obviously touches people, that track, in a certain way that because it was really from the heart, you could feel it. And Mark and I were very, very close in that moment. There was no sort of calculation, or we weren't doing it by numbers, So it's kind of gratifying to hear that, because I hadn't heard tracks like, I Sleep in My Heart or Creator. I hadn't heard those tracks for a long, long time. I go, oh yeah, that's a coherent thing. That's a really cool body of work. And it's great to hear it on vinyl, because you have the side 1, 4 tracks, and you have the side 2, 5 tracks. Sounded amazing on vinyl. So yeah.
Phil, you mentioned it just a minute ago, and first, it's amazing. I'm totally fan geeking right now. This is incredible. Thank you for coming on today.
It's a pleasure, man.
I know recently you and Mike Lindup went back to the Guildhall, where everything started.
Yeah.
And I know that there was stories too that Dominic Miller was part of those early days. And I wanted to ask, what were those first jamming sessions like? Did you ever think, that things were going to explode on you the way they did back in the Guildhall days? And what was it like going back there after all those years?
It was really weird. When if you've gone back to your junior school and it's really tiny, but in your mind the classrooms are really big. But when you go back, you go, oh shit, look at those chairs, they're tiny, But like that's what it was. The Guild, the actual rehearsal room, which was a percussion room that Mike and I first met in, was really small. I was going, holy crap! This all had all the had timps in it and the tubular bells. A vibraphone and marimba, and that's where you go and practice or have your lessons. And that's where they had a drum kit, and me and Mike first met. And everything was really small, but we could get that room on a Monday night from 6 to 9. And we did over the winter of '79 into 1980. And yeah, Dominic was at the Guildhall with Mike. So Dominic was the first guitarist. So it was 4 of us, Mark and Mike, Dominic and I. And then Dominic didn't show up one week, and my brother was kind of around anyway, so he sat in. And then we got this opportunity, and my brother was who was working for MCA Records, my brother John. So, who I know we had a bit of an in, but he was putting out these 12 inches by this guy in North London, Andy Soiker, on this Elite Records. And it was just like 12-inch dancing. And there was a scene happening that we knew nothing about. And it eventually was called the Brit Funk scene by the journalist. But I went to see Andy. I said, I've got this band, and we're really funky, And Mark and Mike didn't even know I was doing that. And I went, and he said, well, look, can you get a rehearsal room? I'll come and hear you. And I borrowed the money off Robin Scott, of the M guy, to hire the rehearsal room. And he came down and he liked this riff, Mark's riff. And he said, well, put a top line on that. And we did. And all of a sudden, we have one day in the studio and we did both the A side and the B side in about 12 hours. And it's like one day's recording. And Mark sang it and he didn't even know he was going to be a singer. I'd never heard him sing. He never sang on the island. He never sang in front of me. And it just sounded good. So we put it out and all of a sudden he sells the 3,000 12 inches, licenses to Polydor, and they sell 80,000 12 inches over that summer of 1980. And Polydor, and then we do another showcase on the Isle of Wight at this club that my brother knew the owner of. You do 2 nights and Polydor come down, they see us, and they give us a 5-album deal. We had no idea that this was going to happen when we started jamming at the Guildhall, of course, complete accidental thing. And I remember having to sit Mark down in a pub in Wimbledon, South London. I don't even know the geography of London, but he said, I want to be a drummer. He said, he's supposed to be a drummer. And I said, Mark, you can do this, because he was playing great bass, and he had never had any intention to be a bass playing singer. He was going to be a drummer. That's why we were, when we moved to London, we weren't in bands initially because he was playing drums, But all of a sudden, he's a bass playing singer. And I said, you can do this. And he went, yeah, all right. let's see what happens. Unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, the talent that guy has is really quite extraordinary, because
it is.
When you think of he was an amazing drummer. He was but he wasn't like me. I was a pocket player. I was like a Earl Palmer, Hal Blaine, like Harvey Mason, little Richie Hayward. I was an American inspired, kind of groove drummer. Mark was really like Tony Williams. So he played like that on the bass. He's like all over the bass. It was amazing. It was just a complete accidental band. It's ridiculous. But it's like, you have opportunities in life, and you might go, well, that's not plan A. I don't do that. That's not my plan A. But it was something else that was offered to us. And we went, well, let's see what happens, And you cannot turn down a 5-album deal. There's no way you could do that.
It's unbelievable.
And then we just have to figure out how to write songs, because we'd never written anything like Love Making Love before. So, and they thought, and I this is my adult hat on now. I realized that our record company thought they were getting, a mixed race band, but it's a mainly white British kind of Earth, Wind and Fire type band. And they were looking at the marketing opportunities of that. And they ended up with this band with doing instrumentals as well as the songs. So there was a bit of that. There was a bit of because most of the Brit Funk scene were black guys, in London, South London guys, some really good bands, but mainly black, some mixed race bands. But we were mixed race and mainly white. And they were looking at that in that way, So it's obviously they were going, well, these guys, we could definitely sell this, So obviously, being honest about it, we benefited from that aspect of what the music industry is. But we didn't know that when we were 21, 22. So we just, all right, well, let's figure out how to write songs, yeah. But the Guildhall was the reason it happened, because we realized that we weren't just mates listening to albums. We were always hanging out listening to music. But all of a sudden, we started playing together properly with Mike and realized we really had a connection. Mike was pretty something else. Mike was amazing. And I was listening to even though we were rushing on this gig that I've heard from 81, the pocket is there. We've really got a pocket. And we are of that first generation of British kids that grew up. I like to lay claim to the fact that we grew up genuinely funky, because by the early 80s, we grew up with Live at the Apollo. We grew up with Sex Machine. We grew up with Stevie. And we grew up, I was 13 when Sex Machine came out. I grew up with James Brown. And my brother was a DJ, so he was always playing, really cool. And he was getting dance records. I was hearing all this stuff. So I reckon we were the first generation of British kids, like probably European kids as well, that could lay claim to being genuinely funky rather than it being an affectation. In when you hear like European bands in the early 70s try and play like Harvey Mason, it's a little bit stiff, But
Right.
we had that in our blood with Stanley Clarke and Stevie and all those incredible. I mean, it was American music. It was Miles Davis, John Coltrane. It was incredible what we were exposed to. And if you knew our background on the Isle of Wight, these little seaside towns we came from, it's inconceivable you come from a place like that and have a career in music. It's really just crazy. I don't know where you guys got from, but Mark came from Gurnard, which is a tiny little town on the north east side of the Isle of Wight. I came from Shanken, little seaside town on the south. And there's nothing happening in there. There's nothing going on in the winter. All the hotels shut and it's dead.
Yep.
But we have cool friends, and I'd go to people's houses and hear his Headhunter by Herbie Hancock, his Sweet Nighter by Level 42, his Tom Lundgren, his Stevie Wonder's new album, his blah 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 blah, his Singer Summer Lawn by Joni Mitchell. So we had very cool friends that would, I remember somebody gave me Bitches Brew one time by Miles Davis, and it took me 6 months to even play it. I was terrified.
I love that you just said Sweet Nighter by Level 42, but it's Weather Report. But I love them both.
That's a bit. Oh, what a
yeah. There you go.
I love that record. I mean, Eric Gravatt's one of all time.
Well, it's your Level 42 kind of got me. Well, I'll start here. My first introduction living in New York was Star Child. That was a big single. And I was DJing with my friends. We all bought that record. We played it a million times. And we were 100% sure this was a black band. Had to be. Eventually, when we got the album, I'm like, oh my God, okay, this is not what we expected, but this is funky as hell. Something that we spoke to Mike and Wally both about on the podcast was neither of them were aware of how popular that particular song was here in America, at least where I grew up in New York. It was all over the radio. Every club you went to played that song. Were you at all aware of that at the time?
Well, I heard a little bit about it, and funnily enough, the person that did the Q&A with us in May about World Machine was actually a DJ in New York in the early 80s, and she was one of the people playing that in clubs. Amazing woman. I can't remember her name. Yeah, I knew that there was some sort of thing about it, like Star Child had this sort of thing in New York clubs. I didn't really guess the impact of it, though. It was something so remote to us at that time.
Yeah, and it was for me, eventually I flip it over, I hear Turn It On. Love that song from the first play, and that spurred me on to, I got to go down to the record shop. I got to find albums by this guy or these guys. And the only thing I could find was the second album, Pursuit of Accidents, on cassette, which is now my favorite album by you guys, but probably because it's the first album that I heard. But that, and that's when I heard, oh, wow, these guys do instrumentals. This is crazy. I'm loving this. And that was sort of my introduction to start getting into more jazzy, fusiony, instrumental kind of things. And I'm going to bring this up because I bring it up with everyone we talk to associated with the band. I have to do it. But my favorite song by the band ever is Return of the Handsome Rugged Man.
Oh, yeah.
And do you have any memories of writing, recording that at all?
I remember, I tell you what, the one thing about that era, because that was early on, wasn't it? That was 81. That was actually, I just came out of music college. I was doing classical percussion. I wasn't playing kit much. So the first record, what you hear on the first album, and like the B-sides, like Foundation Empire or Return, you're basically getting me at my absolute limit of my technical abilities. By the second album, like Pursuit of Accidents, I've got a bit looser because I've been touring for a year, But I wish I could have played that track better because it's pretty stiff, my drumming. But I love the track. And actually, the intro chords are my chords. And then I wish we'd done that live, actually, that track.
Oh, my God, I wish you would have too.
It's never too late, Phil.
I mean, I like on the live album. There's that version of Foundation and Empire, which is one of the, which is a side as well. But by 1985, we had the chops to really be able to play that stuff. And when we were really tight. And yeah, I don't know why we never went back to it. But for instance, when I was in the band, we never did Good Man in the Storm. There's a lot of things we never did. So you only have a certain window when you do a gig to do a certain amount of material. Yeah, great. I know that title came from Boon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was an advert in a barber shop on the King's Road. Where it was this really fancy, big barber shop where all the students went. And it had a poster saying "The Return of the Ragged Handsome Man." So he stole it.
Nice. That's the pinnacle for me. Thank you.
Yeah, and as I've noted, "Good Man of the Storm" is the pinnacle for me. So I've always wondered why it was never played live until fairly recently. I was like, maybe Mark doesn't want to play the song, because it was so important to Phil. Who knows? But
Well, no, let me just. One thing. Maybe it was at the time that was pretty hard. He was really good at playing and singing. It's incredible to play against his bass lines. But that bass line, it's all syncopated. I can imagine him trying to do that.
Yeah.
He probably would have done it, but I wouldn't think it'd be very comfortable.
No, he's doing it. He's doing it now, but it took a while,
Yeah.
And just on the subject of your drumming, Phil, how cool was it for you? I don't know. It might have been right as World Machine came out. You were on the cover of Modern Drummer magazine in the U.S. That's a U.S. publication. How cool was that for you to, kind of rate as a drummer? I always think that maybe your lyric, being known as a writer is more important to you than as a drummer. But how cool was that to kind of get that fame as a drummer in America?
Well, it's great. It's great to have that honor. But, because when I was 17, 18, I had my whole room was pasted with Modern Drummer covers all around. Like there was a fantastic one of Billy Cobham in 1974, and it was blue and yellow. I remember this cover, and I was massive Billy Cobham fans, and just I had this on my wall, and it was like this idea. The idea of being in that magazine was so extreme when I was. You know what I mean? Like it is for anybody coming through. So that was great. It was a great honor, yeah, and I was really happy about it. But the whole thing was bizarre because, like I said, we came from a place where, like, you really shouldn't come out. There's no, you shouldn't. There's no way, people just, when we left the Isle of Wight to go to London, we all went at the same time, me, Boon and Mark, in the autumn of 1978. I went to music college, they came up to London. And people were saying, oh, you'll be back in 6 months. So they're too switched on for you up there. And we really believe that too, in a way. I mean, we love music and we wanted to try and do something, but we never, I'll tell you a very brief story. Mark worked at Macari's on Charing Cross Road, which is one of the big, at that time, Charing Cross Road and Shaftesbury Avenue was full of music shops. It was all the guitar shops. Rose Morris is where Pete Townsend would go and grab his guitars off the wall and smash them. And we had this, Mark worked at Macari's, so it's full of bass guitars and amps. And I was at the Royal Academy, which is just up the road, maybe a 15-minute walk. I walked down, after lessons, see him, hey, doing, and he'd be in there playing bass, and he was sounding really good. And I'm going, but we, every time, and I hope this doesn't sound weird, but, we were just convinced that every black musician we'd ever meet would be like Stanley Clarke or Stevie Wonder, all the geniuses that we've been listening to, and that we would never be able to be on that level with any black musician. And these guys would walk in and they pick up a bass and we go like, oh, well, okay, now we're going to get the full story, And I look at Mark and this guy be thumping away. I say, you sound better than these guys, man. after a winter of this, actually, you're better than anybody I've heard come in this shop. No, don't be ridiculous,
Yeah.
And he was just like, it was incredible what he did on that instrument. So, but we came through Stanley Clarke and Turn Forever, you know what I mean? And we just came through that incredible period. Like, Journey to Love and Stanley Clarke's first album and Mahavishnu and
yeah.
Weather Report, what a time.
Yeah.
And I have to add it. The thing about what I've always, I'm a student of everything American, in terms of American music, and we all play American music. This is the whole thing. And this is why when you hear Hal Blaine or you hear Earl Palmer in the Rock and Roll Guys. Well, I was listening to some Buddy Rich Big Band last night. Like he did it live at Ronnie Scott's 1972 Big Swing Face, and like all these American guys. There's no way, and I speak to my friend Jeremy Stacey is one of the top drummers. There is a level that, because most of what we're dealing with is American music, there is a level these musicians get to, which we can only aspire to, and we try and get there. But there's no way I'm in the same league as a Keith Carlock or you know what I mean, or a Chris Coleman, and I'm totally cool with that because I didn't come from that world. But it's still to this day the thing about American music. I mean, Americans love British music, and I remember when Mark met Lenny White in New York, he loved Yes and Genesis, and
Right.
and Led Zeppelin. Mark couldn't believe it. So why is he listening to that lot? It is Turn the Forever, But we were hanging on every record that came out of America, and I had shut me up if you want to stop. By just one last thing. I had in the 70s. My brother had one of his best friends was on the QE2 going to New York, backwards and forwards playing on the band, and so a lot of records that were coming out in America weren't coming out anymore. Like Deodato's first album, Prelude by Deodato, that wasn't released in the UK, so it was only on import or something. He brought that back. So my friend Tim, his name, I'll give him Tim Marshall, and he's bringing back these albums, and we go, what the hell is that? So I was listening to that when I was 14, going, what is this? And then you later learn that this is, Billy Cobham's on drums, you got Ron Carter, Stanley Clarke, you got like the best brass sections, John Faddis, the best string players in America on these records, and definitely in New York, And this what you're hearing is the pinnacle of what's possible in contemporary music at that time. But we were, and you would steal that album and listen to it for 6 months and then hand it back. So inspiring. I can't tell you how inspiring that period was for us in that little town.
Phil, in recent history, actually, the late, great Taylor Hawkins listed you amongst one of the best drummers in the world. I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I knew he was a fan. But he came through our band, like we went through the bands that we went through. Like for his generation, Level 42 was part of the landscape coming up. So he got something out of the way that we played, and what we were doing, or what I was trying to do as a drummer, was what was coming in the 80s. Was a coming thing where people were, from Off the Wall onwards. Like for J.R. Robertson and Off the Wall, people were playing very direct and very clean, and they weren't messing about so much, And I used to play a lot of left-handed in the studio, sometimes just to stop myself messing about. So it'd be like a clean groove, Yeah, I was very honored I'm so sad. I had that conversation with him that went into, was it Modern Drummer or something?
Yeah,
else?
no, it was a different drummer magazine. I have a copy of it. It's phenomenal.
I mean, it was a lovely conversation. He's an amazing guy, and then of course, a few months later, he's gone. But his heroes were like Roger Taylor, Stuart Copeland.
Yep.
I was in the list, and there's one or two others, Neil Peart maybe. But he was. I think what he was is he liked in our playing, or my playing, was what I loved in Harvey Mason and maybe J.R. Robinson. Well, that was the idea of pocket. That you can do a lot by doing very little. You can say a lot by saying very little. That minimalism thing, and that was just beginning as we get to the end of the 70s into the 80s. That attitude was really coming in. So by the time we get to Back in the High Life by Stevie Winwood, the drum parts mid 80s are very clean. There's not much. Not the flying around that was going on in the late 60s. And we were part of that movement, I think. Like the idea, like a track like Turn It On was like hardly any fills, and really space for the syncopation and the keyboard parts and stuff like that.
I just loved how you mentioned Neil Peart, and he was a fan of yours too, Phil. And when you're thinking here in the States and around the world, he is like, top. Everybody says he's the greatest drummer ever, right? But he put you in. He would say, "I couldn't do what Phil Gould does," and that kind of blew my mind when I was reading him say that. And just also I think, just referring to that Modern Drummer cover magazine of early '86, I'm fairly sure you were on the cover of a major U.S. musician magazine before Mark was, by virtue of you being on that cover.
Yay.
So you can rub that in his face.
I mean, yeah. No, I mean, I sadly never met Neil. I never met Taylor. I mean, I obviously had that Zoom chat with him. I'd like to have met Neil. He's obviously a superstar. And I actually went to the Taylor Hawkins tribute gig at Wembley,
Right.
and the two guys from Rush were there playing with. I think it was Hakim was on drums.
Yes, it was. Yep.
Incredible, and that was an honor to be there. I mean, just to hear that. It was actually Queen's lighting guys and sound guys. So these stadium gigs are a nightmare, but it sounded incredible. The whole thing. And Paul McCartney was there, Chrissy Hine, it's like Foo Fighters. It was a beautiful tribute for Taylor and a gift to his family, because that was, it's all.
Yeah.
And Mark played in the U.S. tribute, ironically enough.
One of his favorite songs was "Something About You." I didn't know that until that.
Yeah.
There's video of him. I'm sorry to cut you off, Bob. I was just speaking to a friend of mine. Well, I think it was yesterday. He's a big Foo Fighters fan, and I asked him if he knew that Taylor had sung and performed "Something About You" a few times.
Well, I saw something on YouTube. Somebody told me he's doing it with his band. I thought, well, that's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I tell you what was really, I've got some of my friends in England they get Ash Stone, and you get like Jeremy Stacey. These really people are playing with everybody kind of drum. And Jeremy's one of the top session guys. Jeremy's an incredible drummer who did all those years with Sheryl Crow. Has played with Wayne Crash. He can do anything, But Jeremy is very close to Noel Gallagher, and went to see Oasis at Wembley, and then the night before they had a dinner. And apparently at the dinner, Noel sang "The Sun Goes Down" all the way from start to finish, all the lyrics.
No
Oh,
kidding.
wow.
I never would have ever guessed that he would have even. I'm not saying he's a fan, but the fact that he knows that track, it just shows you that people listen to things that you don't sometimes expect them to. Like if you knew, like one of my favorite records of all time is Andrew Gould, "Never Let It Slip Away."
Yeah.
But I just love that song. But if I would have mentioned that when I was 21, my peer group would have gone, "You're an idiot." One thing,
Right.
What is this yacht rock stuff?
Okay, we're gonna bleep out the yacht rock reference.
Sorry,
I hate
sorry.
that.
I know. That's why.
That's a running joke between us. Okay, so probably a common question, but as far as the songs that the band put out, in your opinion, what's the one that got away? The one that you thought should have been a big hit, but wasn't?
I don't know. I don't think. I don't know. I never thought that. I never thought there was a song. I knew that the songs that they took off the albums were the obvious things they could take off the album.
Mhm.
I mean, I thought a song like maybe when we reformed and we did Forever Now, I thought there was a song called Model Friend that I really liked that song, and it was just completely overlooked by the record company. I don't know why.
Well, for me, it was "Love in a Peaceful World" too. That was the one.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I really like that song, and it was so weird that if you read the lyrics of that song, "You came from out of nowhere yesterday, would have blew my cool, and that's okay." I wrote that the day before Mark called me to go back and work with on the project. So weird.
That is
Like,
weird.
It's been around forever anyway, and you had to face the truth someday. Strange after all these years, after all these, my tears, to find you there in front of me. Oh, come on, man. That's
Psychic.
But it was nice to do it. And actually doing that project, although it didn't probably go in the direction everybody hoped it would, it was a really good way to resolve a lot of the nonsense that had gone on between us. And then we didn't speak to each other for a while, but it was fine because we'd sort of moved apart anyway as human beings, but we had a chance to play together again. And that kind of connection that we had as a rhythm section, in a writing thing, I think we both realized you'd only get that once in a lifetime, because we were so different as people, but together we made up for each other's, deficiencies. And I could fill in the background. Mark was a big stroke kind of guy, and then I could come around the back and fill in these gaps and maybe add a chord or add some lyrics. And it was a great team. And the way we used to play drums as well was great, because I would always do the upper part of the drum, the rototom thing or the drum thing. He would do the low end. So we had that connection there. You do the earthy, kind of a little guttural down earthy thing. And I would do the kind of more melodic aspect on the top. That was how it was with us. I'm slightly more, he's slightly more alpha male than I am, so it worked. And that's how things should be, but it doesn't mean it's going to be forever. But yeah, there was a nice moment doing that, and I think I wish something "Lovely Piece of World" had been recorded a bit better, the rhythm track. But I do like that song. I'm very happy with it, and also that it's really not bitter. There's actually a very positive message, and it's nice to put things like that out into the world.
Phil, at that time when Forever Now came out, I was actually, I was hanging out in New York City, and I got to meet and know a little bit Danny Bloom, who you had gotten him to play on guitar on that album.
Yeah,
and I remember him saying, if I'm recalling correctly, that when you heard it, you weren't thrilled with how the sound production was. If I'm recalling, maybe it's just production overall, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's a phenomenal album, and the fact that you were able to play on it, I've always wondered, like, you're listed as doing loops on that album. Was it? And Winston and I have talked about this. Did you play a lot of drums straight on that, or are they all mostly loops? You recall?
There's some straight drums on it, but there's also loops with overpasses on it. We were trying a different approach, and we tried things that maybe we could have looked at again. I mean, there are 2 or 3 songs on that album which I really don't think are very good. There's a track called "Learn to Say No." The lyric on that is just dreadful.
Which one? I'm sorry.
But a lot of things. There's a track called "Learn to Say No," which may not have been on the actual album, right. But it's just not. It's not good enough. And I just threw out a lyric because I just thought it was like something we would maybe come back to, and then I think put it out as a B-side. It might have been on the album, but I think there was a point when the A&R got involved, where I really started to feel, and I tend to operate on intuitive process. And once the A&R got involved, you could tell that he was going to get remixes done. And I thought, what is this? I started to creativity started to shut down. I couldn't think of anything to write anymore, And I've always thought, it's not a lot of aspects of making music and records is very analytical. You try and working on the sound and have beat placement and tracks and things like that. But when it comes to lyrics, it's very much like the Sundance Kid. I can do it a certain way if I shoot from the hip. If I do it the way I can do it. But if you ask me to sit down and overthink it, it's just not going to work. And once we got into that thing of all of a sudden the record company demands start saying, well, you need to do this. And all of a sudden, I don't know how to respond to that. So the early phase of doing it was some really nice things. And I can see that this lunatic A&R guy at RCA he just signed Take That and all this kind of nonsense.
Right.
So it was kind of like a different world than what we had. We had autonomy at Polydor. We could do what the hell we wanted to do.
Yeah.
But this was different at RCA. They were dictating things a little bit, and I don't respond to that very well. So anyway, it didn't go beyond that. But like I said, in terms of a personal experience, to go back and work with Mark and Mike, we should have worked with Boon as well. That's something I do regret, but he should have come in and got involved. But there was, there was some nice tunes, and it could have gone on, but it obviously didn't,
Yeah.
Yeah, to piggyback on "Love in a Peaceful World," that's in my top 3 songs by the band, and I was excited or happy when I saw your writing partner Steve White from the Style Council. How did that come about? You guys working together?
We were doing some stuff in the early 90s. In fact, we had a project called the Spin Doctors, and we were just about to get signed when they did a discovery, and they discovered there was a band in America called the Simpsons. Just being signed, and 2 years later they had Two Prince, that big hit.
Yeah.
It's really annoying because I had that book. I had that name for a band in my book from the mid '80s. I was going, my next band is going to be Bastards. But anyway, Steve and I we had a book that was going to come out in late '91, and it was scrapped because of the name. And we couldn't think of anything else. And then and Steve just gave me a load of Indian samples one day. He came down to I had a place in the West Country, and he came down. And I played one sample, and that inspired the chord progression for the verse, which is your basic soul progression, isn't it? It's like, almost like every breath you take, really. And then another sample inspired the B section, and then another sample inspired the chorus. So I was just sort of fiddling with these chords. Yeah, it was great. One thing I loved about working on that track when we did record it was working with Wally and Mike and Mark on the vocals. And you listen to the chorus, and you have like Mark singing the main thing with his harmony, and then Mike comes in with a harmony, and then you hear Wally coming in with another harmony, bam, 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 bam. And you hear all these different personalities in the harmony and the big end chorus. It's fantastic, So I do regret not being able to have a bit more of that in my life, like creatively, with those working with those guys on more music, because they were so great to work with, And none of them were singers, and they all sang incredible parts, and they all sang really well,
I always thought the ba 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 at the end was you, Phil.
No, that's Wally singing that.
Wow, had no idea. I just learned something, everybody.
Yeah, and Mike did, and Wally would do. Wally's got an amazing sounding voice, and he's always got beautiful ideas. There's a track on my album, what was it called? All in a Day's Work, where he does this thing he does this thing on the end of it. And I definitely should change the writing credit on that. You should have just got that alone, but it's amazing to be in the studio with Wally. That was the greatest experience for me, was getting back to the studio. Touring is one thing, and when you're younger, it's exciting, but being in the studio with those guys was incredible. And we would record really fast. World Machine was done in 5 weeks. We wouldn't hang about, because we were in a band, we do rhythm tracks over 10 days to 14 days, do a week of overdubs, week of vocals, and mix. And it was like bang, bang, bang. But being in the studio with Wally was just so great, because he's a half African, half French, naturalized Frenchman. And he would just say, I have an ID, and scratch his chin. I have an ID. And then he would start going to work, and he'd start twiddling with the Prophet or the Moog. And he had a Roland Chorus Echo, or the Space Echo. And next thing, he got this landscape, Like if you listen to something like Star Child with the the synthesizer work on that.
Yeah.
And that's his riff, by the way. Bum, 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 bum. That's Wally Better riff that we liked, and I'd heard before. And I said, "What about that riff, Wally?" I said to Wally, "We could do that, And so we did the B section, and we were at the middle bit, and we did the top parts. But all those parts, if you listen to it, it was just a Prophet or a mini Moog with a chorus echo, and it's or a chord polyphonic, which I've got over here. There's a Prophet 600 I've got over there. And it's just what they did, those guys, with the 3 keyboards and 1 effects unit. That's unbelievable. The imagination was incredible, So, and one thing about Mike, one thing about being in a band when you're 21, you never show appreciation. You're so self-centered when you're in your early 20s. You're just trying to survive, really. You're trying to make it in the world in some way. But you never go like, oh, you're great, That's brilliant. But when you see those the footage of Mike in the early 80s, he's got like 4 or 5 keyboards, and he's doing all the parts.
And singing.
And singing.
Yeah.
He's pressing this button where he can do chord on the roads and hold the same pedal and do a Prophet part. It's unreal.
Yeah, we talked about that. Like, I think I asked him, you were such a technician up there. Were you even able to appreciate the crowd because of how much you were doing with your hands and your voice? It's got to be challenging.
And then you hear his piano playing like Pursuit of Access. You hear the solos, and they're really great. I mean, he was a pretty advanced musician, Mike. And Mark and I were coming from the perspective of very, very, we knew about, jazz chords and things like that, but we were very triad-based writers. And I was coming from, I've got a book over here it's the Oxford Book of Hymns. It's called Songs of Praise. Mm-hmm. And I was just learning hymns. So when you hear Love Games, like those chords are basically hymn chords. I'm playing triads. Or like when you hear like A Good Man in the Storm, it's triads and then you have the B section, which is a bit different, and then the breakdown, you da 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 da. That's actually was a hymn that I'd written.
Mhm.
Bum, 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 bum. But then we put it in time. These are hymn chords, you know.
Yep.
Me and Mike were triad based in a way. I was coming from a bit like I was influenced by people like Paul Simon and those kind of writers who were coming from ecclesiastical musical, you know, with first inversions, second version. But Mike was the one adding the ninths and the 11th. He was doing the extended chords, like a song like "Why Are You Leaving?" It's got all those kinds of extended, funky, almost very American sounding chords that we were listening to with Stevie or the Philadelphia sound of extended chords. So yeah, Mike was the one adding those extensions, and me and Mark were the basic triad guys, you know. So it's a very cool thing to have around. Mike had a vocabulary and you could expand on that and take something into a really spectacular place, you know, harmonically. It's great.
And where do you think Boon fit in all this? You know, we always call him kind of the underrated guy in the band. His parts were so tasteful. His sound was so original. Where do you kind of see him fitting in the first, 7 years of the band?
Well, Boon was coming from a very different place. So Mark and Mike had a certain musical language because of our shared influences that I didn't necessarily have with Boon. He was coming from rock, and he like that. So it was difficult, and it's obviously that. I found this tape of this gig in 1981, and he's incredible playing, and it's take no prisoners guitar playing. It's like, da 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 da. It's not polite by any means. It's not like da 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 like the jazz funk stuff in London at that time. There was a thing happening in London bands where it was that jazz. We call it the jazz funk push. Boom, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam, boom, boom, bam. And people were playing that thinking, well, that's funky then, and it wasn't, you know. But Boone's pocket when he played was. There's a track he played on my last album called The Russian Submariner, and one of the things that struck me in the studio was like, God, this guy's beat placement, his timing is world class, you know. And he never kind of saw that as being a great thing because he could just do it, but he could play anything. And the one not as many regrets I have because we did have problems because I'm the younger brother and I formed. That's a very weird dynamic for a kickoff, you know. Yeah. But like he should have been far more involved sonically from day one. He had to make a lot of room for Mark to do what he did. But what's amazing about the way it ended was like the most successful era of the band. His guitar was front and center of that sound. Like something about it would not have been what it was without Boone's guitar solo, with that sound, and also that whole album. Like you listen to a track like Physical Presence. The guitar on that is just magnificent, you know. Yeah. And so what I'm very grateful for is the fact that the most successful iteration of the band. I mean, he co-wrote Lessons in Love with Mark and Wally. I had nothing to do with that. So he got a share of the success, but also once we had that massive hit with Something About You, then of course they did a similar thing guitar-wise on Lessons in Love, and it was like he was at the front of it then, you know. So he wasn't necessarily at the front of it in the early days, which is a cause of regret. And also, we were bringing in outside sax players to do solos on our first album. He should have done it. He did a sax solo on Love Making Love. He was great on sax. Why were we not only?
I think people forget about that he played sax.
Yeah, and we were, he was a multi-instrumentalist, but he wasn't as noisy as me and Mark. Mark was really pushy. And Mark was really belligerent, you know, and I was kind of with Mark, but kind of following in his, his wind, his, vortex. And Wally was very driven. So we had to get things done really quickly. So we didn't have budgets, you know, so it was a problem for Boone because we would come up with ideas really fast and he wasn't at that speed at that time. By the fourth and fifth albums, he began to make real inroads sonically and lyrically. But yeah, I really wish he'd had more of an influence sonically. I mean, there's a track on Pursuit of Accents, Icewood Falling. Well, I listen to the guitar on that, and it's a very different track. to other things we were doing. But the guitar on that's incredible. The arpeggiated dun, 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 it's just brilliant. And I'm going, why did we realize how good that guy was? We did later when we did World Machine. I think everybody went, "Oh, this is really incredible," you know. But there was probably a period where we took it for granted. I think.
Yeah, as a fan of the band, like when I got into the band, it's like, oh yeah, it's funky. Obviously, I could relate to Mark's bass playing because that's what I grew up on, listening to R&B and stuff. But it was also Boon. His playing was very, I don't know, I felt his playing a lot because I heard a lot of players. And I'm like, okay, these are guys from England, but he plays like an American R&B player to me, guitar-wise. And one of my favorite memories, you know, I used to be in the military. I went back to Delaware where I was stationed to visit some guys. World Machine album was out. And we had like a cookout, and it's at night. We got a bonfire going. Something About You comes on. And this is not a group of Level 42 fans. But when it gets to the guitar solo, everybody starts singing the guitar solo.
Wow.
Which it was just amazed me. Like, they just know this song tangentially on the radio. Like, this is another hit song. But that guitar solo, everyone felt that. And I've never seen that. You know, you get people in a group and maybe they sing the lyrics. But for these folks to just spontaneously sing that guitar solo, to me, that's amazing. And I'm kind of
It is amazing. Yeah.
kind of emotional right now.
Well, yeah, that does make me feel a bit emotional, actually. I mean, like the whole thing about that, like the idea of it, like the idea of creating something that's going to stand the test of time. Like, you can easily just go into the studio, just wail away, and then leave the studio. But if you want people to play a record repeatedly over and over again, it's got to be constructed in such a way as to have stand up to repeated listings. You know, I remember that Chris Brunt, the guy we worked with in LA with Larry Everdeen, told us a story. He worked on a Stevie Wonder album that never got released, but probably some of the tracks were released on the Music Aquarium album later.
Yeah.
But he was doing work that never got, a bit like Prince, going to see a recording and only putting out specific things. But Chris said the way he started doing vocals was he was just going on the mic and just singing his heart out, and it was incredible. Chris was just saying this is brilliant, and he would just do it 7 or 8 times, and then he said, right now we're going to make the record. So he would just get out of his system his joyful music making, the musicality that the guy had. He would just get it out of the system, and then he would construct a vocal arrangement that would be played again and again and again. It wouldn't be just any old thing. He really knew what he was doing. And even with the Tonto guys, he would be, his voice would be breaking and trying to do it, Living for the City, and they'd be stopping the tape and going back and stopping the tape, making him mad. But it's all about that considered approach, to putting something out there. And the creation, I wasn't actually in the studio when they did the guitar solo for Something About You, but it's a creation, and it's something, and it's not something you would want to change. You'd go on stage, and it's a bit like the solo that Wally did on Love Games. It was an improvised solo. Right. He's just with the mini moog, and he's doing a kind of scat thing. But it was so cool once he did it that of course it's going to do that because it's part of the song. It's not just a solo. And the same thing with that solo or Something About You. It's got that because it really ends the song. You come out of the solo and then you're into the chorus and you're into the fade, but it's the pinnacle of the song, and it's a melodic. It's as melodically important as the chorus melody.
Yeah. And I think at the end of that solo, there might be 2 tracks. Like there's a harmonic track, I think. I don't know. I don't think he did it at the same time. If he did, he's a machine.
The weird thing when Boon came to the studio, it's in 2018 to work on that track that ended up being called The Russian Submariner. In fact, I've been working on the song version of that track recently. Mm-hmm. And also I've done an edit, which is like a TV thing, because I reckon it could be a theme. It sounds incredible, but so it's kind of, I've got to the place now where I can hear Boon's playing without it being completely freaking me out. Like I can't either turn the tape off because it was very difficult to even listen to that track for a long time. But when he was in the studio with us, he brought these Eddie Van Halen simulation amps down, which, you had a little dial. This is a Marshall, this is a JC120 or something. And it sounded awful. But in the studio, they had the Fender Twin and they had a JC120, which was Boon's combination back in For Something About You. And he set it up and they linked the amps together, and there you are. He got his sound back. And it was incredible. And all of a sudden he could play in this free way. It's very moving to think about. And he had these 2 days with us, and I thought maybe it was the turnaround for him to really believe in himself as a musician, because he really didn't. He came down so hard on himself. He really didn't think much of himself as a musician. I remember going back after that session to London and we went to the 606 Club, and there was Paul Stacey, Adam Phillips, all these top London guitarists there. And these are the guys who do the voice on TV or do all the sessions. Paul Stacey produces, Noel Gallagher or anybody. And I was just in the studio with my brother, and they go, "Oh, Boon, I love his playing, man." And I rang Boon the next day. I said, "Jesus, these guys, you don't realize how rated you are, Mm-hmm. And he's going, "No, bollocks." It's really horrible to think about, because he couldn't enjoy himself as a musician, because he really didn't think that much of what he could do. And that's the problem when if something comes so easily to you, you don't. It's like somebody can throw a ball like 100 miles an hour, and they can just do it without any practice. They don't treat it with somebody that has the same way somebody has to acquire that skill, And I think it's like that. Boon was so effortlessly good on so many instruments that he didn't see that as something that he could have self-esteem in. If I'm making sense?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, we hope you enjoyed part one of our two-part interview with Phil Gould as much as we have. Keep an ear out and an eye out for part two of this really great chat with Phil coming very, very soon. So for Phil, Winston, and Mikey, this is Bob Considine. Thanks for listening as always, and we'll wait till you return.
But it's time to turn it on whenever you can turn it on. You know that you